Welcome to the show, everybody. Micah with CoronavirusDiaries, and today I'm fortunate to be able to speak again with Dr. Andrew Scarbrough, a practicing clinical psychologist here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. Dr. Scarbrough, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, well, I know you're a busy individual, and I can't thank you enough for your insights and your expertise. There's been a lot that's taken place since the last time we talked. COVID, it's been this ongoing thing. But just a few weeks ago, there was the killing of George Floyd in our city, and it's now become this epicenter of what a lot of people are calling the largest civil rights movement in recorded history.
Yeah, during a pandemic too.
Yeah, like pandemic riots,
Yeah.
and it got me thinking. So me and you we've been able to talk about a lot of different things, but it led me to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and just as kind of the very kind of intro to talking about basic needs of people and motivations. And I was curious your thoughts on this psychology or this theory of
Yeah, basically,
Maslow's.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You look at a pyramid and you look at what the base of it is. The lowest level of the pyramid is kind of like a food pyramid, but if you look at the base of the pyramid, it's like food, water, shelter, things you need for survival. Like you will perish without these things. Uh, there's a lot of levels above that, but the one right after that is safety. And I think that was
Security,
the
right?
one that a lot of people are are lacking. You look at where you're at right now. Um, um, Murder of an African American by police got a lot of people feeling very much unsafe.
Yeah, it
And
was
you have
blatant
that.
disregard for human life, lack of empathy.
Yeah,
Regardless, something that frustrates me is some people will be like, well, he wasn't a good individual because he was high on drugs and had a criminal record. And it's,
yeah.
I'm not denying any of that is true, but to just blatantly disregard and have this callous, response to like, well, he
I
deserved
think
it.
that's a defense
It
mechanism. There might
just
be some racism involved in it too, but it's a defense mechanism. Um,
okay.
I'm not going to pretend that I understand the African American experience. That I've worked um, in places where I was the only white guy there, and it was practice of dominantly African Americans.
Yeah.
I got some insight into some perspectives that I really valued and appreciated.
You spent many of your years actually serving the underserved population, correct? What would
Yeah,
be deemed an underserved population, North Minneapolis and other areas. So it's
yeah. Um, I hear a lot of different things. I wouldn't care personally if George Floyd was a murderer. I think it still speaks to the fact that you know police shouldn't have done that. I think you when you discredit, you're like, oh, he was a crack smoker
there
or
was no
something
due
like that.
process to the judgment and execution. Like it just, and then, yeah,
Yeah, that doesn't mean that the police have the right to murder him.
right.
That's a reflection of them. It's a way to sort of pull focus to this as opposed to like what the horrible thing.
What the
Uh,
real meat and potatoes is, which then back to the hierarchy of needs and safety and security. I was curious your thoughts on, so everybody that I know anyway, when COVID came in and started locking everything down, and at least initially, everybody was a little bit on edge. The idea of safety, the idea of security was kind of fleeting. Nobody really knew what was happening. There was a lot of wild news coming from overseas, and you didn't really know what to believe. So it kind of started changing a lot of elements for many people that I know. Right? There's the the highest level of the pyramid of the five elements is self-actualization and achieving like this, the epitome of whatever it is you're trying to.
Maslow would say most people don't get that fifth level. He would
Okay.
say most
Is
people
it is
don't.
that because one of the other levels is impeding their ability to reach that?
You would need to get all the levels to get to the top of the pyramid. Self-actualization would be like an ideal self that you strive for, that you're motivated by good nature and the things that you do
So
are,
what happens if you just strip security out? Like I know
well,
how I
everything
felt.
falls apart. I mean, there are things that you could sort of cheat a little bit on the pyramid and probably still kind of have some of the levels above it. Security, though, is a big one. If people are attempting to gain self-esteem or find love or meaningful relationships, and you're in a war-torn country, a refugee status, there's not many positive stories that stem from that. You can't really have this peaceful, happy existence with like family, friends, and loved ones, and all of these other levels of the pyramid if you're in a war
backyard barbecues and
yeah, you can't really do it. It's you can't really have one without the other. So I think what a lot of people have done is they've tried to come up with illusions of safety, and and there's some people that are very alarmed, and have the right to be. But then I think there's a lot of people, I'd say especially in the white community, who come up with a narrative to to unfortunately minimize the Black experience, but also because I don't think it's just necessarily an insensitivity to African Americans or being racist. I think a lot of it too is that we don't want to believe that. I've been guilty of this in the past, where somebody shared, I'm thinking of a coworker I had, a Black woman, she's great. She told me about an experience, or like this is years and years ago, but I was like, I don't know if that really happened the way you think it did. That cop or whatever was probably, you just misunderstood what he intended, or you misunderstood the situation. A total jerk thing to say. I'm embarrassed that I've said that before, but there's so many white people out there that will minimize and they'll cut down a Black person when they share their experience of racism, of things like that. And I think it would be easy to get very mad when somebody does that. But I think also too, sometimes white people are, they just don't want to believe it. You don't want to believe it, and you don't believe it maybe until you see evidence of it, and then you still hear people. I don't think these people have a very loud voice because they realize that sort of minimizing the situation is not going to be a popular opinion. It can get them a lot of criticism. But I think a lot of people, if you talk to white people and there's no people of color in the room, some of the patients that I've worked with, some of the people I've talked to, I keep good company, but sometimes people will say some stuff and I'm like, I
check
don't,
yourself.
yeah, I don't think, blaming George Floyd for anything in this situation is helpful. I don't think trying to justify the cops' behavior is helpful. I think it's a real reach, and it might just be pure racism, but I think sometimes it's people trying to come up with a narrative that fits a reality that keeps them safe, that keeps that piece of the pyramid intact for them.
So something that I keep considering, and I don't know that it necessarily plays in, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Operant versus classical conditioning. Say operant conditioning, right? Like Pavlov's dogs and the bells, and
that'd be more the classical, probably.
Or classical.
Yeah.
But this notion that people are going to have a certain type of experience in their life, and based on skin color alone, there is different experiences, and I've on a limited basis, and I'm not even trying to be like I know what it is, but I spent a couple of years overseas in Southeast Asia, and just being the foreigner, the expat in communities that were the locals, it's a different type of treatment, it's a different type of everything, and on a very, very small scale that may not even be relevant, is you could be standing kind of in a line and people just funnel right in front of you, and it's like you're not even there. It's kind of like, whoa, it's just this weird little, like a nudge, like, yeah, like whatever, you're less important. And it's kind of this crazy thought. But do you think people may be prone to trying to come up with these narratives to lessen or downplay that like specifically what just happened with George Floyd because of experience, or
I think that absolutely is true. That you're coming up with a narrative that fits you. Um, there's another interesting thing that happens too, where people have a hard time understanding why a group of people would respond the way they have to. Um, I
like riots and looting and
Yeah, yeah. You might say, well, look at this community that it's it's destroying itself in some ways by
in a lot
destroying.
of ways, right? The community that was
People might say
impacted
it.
was
This isn't
predominantly.
my opinion. This is something somebody could say, and it's something that I might have heard. I have heard. Um, I think it's very easy to have an ethnocentric lens on, and viewing like yourself and then like everyone else, as opposed to thinking of really empathizing with that situation and thinking if you were in it. So, for example, let's say that there were more black people than there were white people, and let's say that black people were putting their knees on the back of white people's necks in the street and killing them. How do you think the white community would react differently than the black community is reacting to the George Floyd thing? I don't think it would be that dissimilar. I think you'd see a very similar response. I think if now, even in the way society is, if you had a group that was predominantly African Americans going out there and killing white people, you'd have a contingent of white people, rednecks with shotguns or whatever, that might rally the troops and want to do some street justice and cause some serious ruckus. I don't think that's any different than, I mean, you put yourself, like reverse the situations,
Sure.
and what you're looking at makes sense. I don't think people necessarily do that.
When I initially asked you to come on and kind of dive into this, we talked a little bit about, okay, what are we really trying to get at the root of, and something that you had brought up was a film, and there was a way that somebody in a lawyer presented.
It was a time to kill. It's a movie about Samuel L. Jackson and Matthew McConaughey's, and at the end of the movie, he's giving his final summation, and he says, imagine he's recounting the story of this young black girl's rape and near murder, and then he's recounting it, and he gets to the end of this sort of painting this picture of this broken young girl who's been beaten horribly, and she's lying waiting to die in a creek bed, and then he says, like, now imagine she's white, and the whole courtroom is like, oh my God, that changes it so much. And it's like, well, it shouldn't, right?
Right.
You should have the same reaction, to seeing any girl on the bottom of a creek bed beaten like that. That's a horrible thing. Why is it so much more horrible if it's a white girl? And
What
I
is
think
the disconnect there? Like, how does that happen? Is there a psychological thing? I'm fascinated with how color and religion and gender and everything plays a role in society, and just that small, like that thing, that one, that delivery of that, I don't know what it's called, but the delivery in court, and just adding that at the end, it had in the film, it had an impact. And I think for most people, they'd recognize kind of how it happened and how it was so poignant.
people who shared similar characteristics um, grouped together because it was an evolutionary advantage.
Birds of a feather flock together.
Yeah, if you are sort of able to identify more keenly with one particular group, and that group sort of gets you, how you think, you work well together, you may have similar characteristics, you may have similar experiences, right?
Sure.
Um, uh, the average a black person is going to understand another black person's experience more accurately than a white person is going to understand the black person's experience.
Sure.
Pretty simple statement. I think you can get some skewed racist views of these, like Nazi type people who would say like the white race is the supreme superior race, and they're just racist. But I think in general, people do just tend to sort of empathize more with people who look like them, who have a similar set of circumstances.
Yeah,
It's
there was
good.
a, we're coming back from when I was in the service, the first time I had deployed, when we were doing the reintegration process and about to come back into civilization. I remember that our captain at the time was like, if people are trying to ask you about it, or, like tell us what it was like in combat, the average civilian that's never, served in any capacity where you're in a line of duty like that, where there's imminent threat and high, environment. He had said, just tell them it'd be like trying to explain the color red to a blind person, because it's kind of
Yeah,
like, unless you're actually there and experiencing it and smelling it and seeing it, you can't really explain it. So I could
yeah.
imagine that being similar.
You're going to have more empathy to your fellow soldier. Let's say there's a soldier, a guy in military fatigues. He's out at a bar. He was drunk. He was making a fool of himself and being a
There's
jerk.
a reason that VAs or the American Legions and the
You don't see
VFWs
that. You don't see this
exist.
often. This is a hypothetical example.
Sure.
But let's say you knew a vet and he was being a jerk. I might look at him, or somebody who wasn't in the military, and say like, God, what a jerk! Like, there's no excuse to be such an a-hole. And you would look at him and you might be like, dude's probably going through a tough time. He's probably got PTSD. Just got back from tour.
Try to empathize.
Yeah, he's probably seen some rough stuff. You would be more likely to have empathy to the vet than I would. I'm a psychologist. I have a lot of empathy for a lot of different people. I'd have empathy for the vet, of course, but just a random person who wasn't in the military would not have as much empathy as you have. It's a similar experience that you guys share, and it bonds you together.
Sure. I'm curious so there was a lot of graffiti and tags and stuff that went up throughout the city, and see a lot of stuff in social media. ECAM is a common term that's being tossed around. It's always been around for a long time, but
I
it's
guess I don't know that one. What's that one?
all cops are bad.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's this idea that, well, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? All
Yep.
cops are bad.
Yep.
I think most logical people would be able to see that as being a blanket absolute that isn't true. But I'm curious because there are good law enforcement officers. There are. It's
Yeah,
the
but
system in place that perpetuates a problem, and it's kind of like
I think it's a compensatory reaction, the same way that if you saw like Shark Week and you saw sharks in the water during a scuba diving trip, you would freak out and treat them differently. When we know that most scuba divers who encounter sharks are perfectly fine.
sure,
There's no danger at all. You can go pet sharks. People do that all the time. There's very, very few shark attacks in the world. Yet, how many people do you know that see a shark, even like maybe trained marine biologists, who would see a shark and their heart rate wouldn't elevate at all, and they would just be like, "Oh, cool, a shark," and they'd not be thinking about some scene in Jaws where a person got sort of bitten in half. It's like you
right,
see a cop. It's almost another evolutionary adaptation that it's like, well, maybe on some level they know that like not all cops are bad, but if it'd be the same logic of like, it's far better for me to just avoid all y'all, because on the chance that I get a man eater or whatever, like a shark, or
right.
a killer, a killer cop, I'm going to stay away from you. So it's a generalization that probably has, I don't believe it. I'll just go out and say that I know there's good cops out there. I understand why people would say that.
So
I think,
stereotypes. It's
yeah,
like snakes and
it's the
spiders.
same.
It's this. Oh, go ahead.
It's conversely, it'd be the same thing. It was saying all African Americans are criminals.
Or all
They're
whites are
saying
racist.
all whites are racist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean you're doing the same thing. I think there's a lot of weird similarities in some of the people that go too far on both sides. They're both kind of doing the same thing and fueling each other's fire in a
Do you
lot of
have
ways.
any sort of remedy a psychological remedy on how to like check yourself? Like if you're working your way through, you know, a thought process of some sort, and you're like some way to check whether or not you're being irrational or you're just, you know, these blanket statements, for like just any
I,
random thoughts.
yeah, I like to use um, empathy. I like to try to imagine somebody that I'm not in agreement with, somebody who's I might initially find to be sort of quite aggravating, and I try to think like, what would be the scenario where I could find empathy for them? And I try to find empathy for them. And I also try to think about, you know, am I thinking about this in a correct way? And is the information I have good? If you watch the news, you would see a lot of sensationalistic coverage. You see some accurate coverage that's pretty good, but you'd also see people who might be showing highlight reels of, um, you know, police
Well, I think
brutality.
the mainstream media just got busted for showing a very specific demographic during the riots, when in fact there was
There you go.
a
Yeah,
very different on the ground.
you can you can edit the news to show whatever you want. You can go out and interview one of the most ignorant, racist, unintelligent people and put a lineup of all their opinions on the news, and then the perception when you see the news is that, you know, all people of this demographic are this way. Look at all the examples
Yeah,
they've given me of this particular group or these particular people being violent, and you're convinced that, when in actuality maybe you've taken this small subset of a population and you've magnified them and showed a clip of the worst possible things, and then you play it over and over with a narrative like chaos, you know, chaos ensues, the city in ruins, being burned alive, or this is the apocalypse, you know, or whatever.
right.
They don't actually say that, but
Yeah.
I've seen some pretty irresponsible narratives and these media companies that people don't realize are trying to get ratings. I got
Yeah.
really mad during the COVID situation when it came out, when there was news outlets that were saying the COVID-19 pandemic, uh, what you need to know to keep your family alive and safe at 6 o'clock. And I was like, wow, that's just irresponsible. Like,
That's heavy.
yeah, you're marketing your newscast, you're gonna get more ratings.
It's fun, right?
There's a mom at home who's like, I gotta keep my babies safe. I gotta protect them. I need to watch what our news reporters say. And
Yeah.
I remember watching that, and I was like, there's nothing groundbreaking here. Like, wash your hands, happy birthdays. And I was like, this isn't critical information that
Yeah.
needs to go out to the masses marketed like that. Um, and it gets more complex with this whole George Floyd um, thing. It's you got
Right,
to
because it
consider your
started with,
sources of information. I think you just consider your sources of information.
yeah,
Think about what you're exposing yourself to, what narrative's purpose might be, and a lot of
sure.
times it's for ratings. There's some good reporting that's showing injustice, but then there's some that's on all sides. Everybody is guilty of doing this, of coming from a biased perspective and selling their point. I can get any, like, here's a sad truth about scientific articles. I can almost have any opinion or point and go find some clinical research that's going to support me, that's going to back me up. And if I just cite the research that backs me up, somebody's going to read that paper and they're going to say, wow, Dr. Scarborough's theory that cotton candy helps you lose weight is brilliant. Like, look at all the evidence, but we know that's BS. But like, well, look at all the evidence. That's all you're seeing. That's all the narrative you're getting. You
Yeah.
don't get people that are cross-checking themselves and disconfirming, you know, this. Um, the good research articles are the ones that say, well, we also did find some few people that said like sugar is probably not good for weight loss, like mass amounts of sugar, which could be something to consider. Um, and people are, I think society in a big way is very interested in their own confirmation bias. If I'm a staunch Republican, I'm going to watch a lot of Fox News. I'm
People
not
want
going
to
to
be
get a
right.
lot of, what's that?
People want to be right. It makes you feel
Yeah,
good.
it makes you feel good. You're with your team. You're with
Yeah.
and they're not going to challenge you with any critical thinking. They're going to drum the narrative that the talking points that they've been given, And you don't need, you hear news people talk about this all the time. You're given their talking points at the start of each day to sort of go through and sort of list, today we're going to push Trump's genius decision to do this and this and this. And conversely too, I'm not trying to
No, I get you.
just take a whack at
everybody has an agenda. Media has
liberal media does this too.
Yeah.
And I think getting a understanding of what the other person's side is. You consider your information and having empathy are, I think, the two best tools that a person has to sort of counteract some of this really problematic reaction that people are having.
Empathy, bro. Dr. Scarbrough, can't thank you enough. And was there anything that you wanted, anything else that was on your mind? Or I know we're pushing that time, and I'm trying to be respectful.
That's about it. I feel like it was good to sort of chat about this stuff. I like these podcasts. So.
Yeah, it's outstanding. Finding the opposing views, having empathy for those that may be in opposition to your own belief system, getting yourself out of your comfort zone to try to be a little more receptive and try to grow a bit as an individual, as a human. Yeah, it's great. I appreciate your insights as always. And thanks for coming on the show, Dr. Scarbrough.
Thanks for having me.
For all the viewers and listeners, be sure to check out the information below. It'll be in the About section, and stick around. We got more coming at you.